George Mallory. George Herbert Leigh Mallory, June 18, 1886, 8 or June 9, 1924, 546–47 was an English mountaineer who took part in the first 3 British expeditions to Mount Everest, in the early 1920s. During the 1924 British Mount Everest expedition, Mallory and his climbing partner, Andrew Sandy Irvine, disappeared on the northeast ridge during their attempt to make the first ascent of the world's highest mountain. The pair were last seen when they were about 800 vertical feet, 245 meters, from the summit. Mallory's ultimate fate was unknown for 75 years, until his body was discovered on May 1, 1999 by an expedition that had set out to search for the climber's remains. Whether Mallory and Irvine had reached the summit before they died remains a subject of speculation and continuing research. Early life, education, and teaching career. Mallory was born in Mobberley, Cheshire, the son of Herbert Leigh Mallory, 1856–1943, a clergyman who changed his surname from Mallory to Leigh Mallory in 1914. His mother was Annie Bridge, née Jebb 1863–1946, the daughter of a clergyman in Walton, Derbyshire. George had 2 sisters and a younger brother, Trafford Leigh Mallory, the World War II Royal Air Force commander. He was raised in a 10-bedroom house on Hopcroft Lane in Mobberley. In 1896, Mallory attended Glencores, a boarding school in Eastbourne on the south coast, having transferred from another preparatory school in West Kirby. At the age of 13, he won a mathematics scholarship to Winchester College. In his final year there, he was introduced to rock climbing and mountaineering by a master, R.L. G. Irving, who took a few people climbing in the Alps each year. In October 1905, Mallory entered Magdalen College, Cambridge, to study history. There, he became good friends with future members of the Bloomsbury Group, including Rupert Brooke, John Maynard Keynes, James Strachey, Lytton Strachey, and Duncan Grant, who took some portraits of Mallory. Mallory was a keen oarsman, who rowed for his college. In 1909, Lytton Strachey wrote of Mallory. After gaining his degree, Mallory stayed in Cambridge for a year writing an essay he published as Boswell the Biographer, 1912. He lived briefly in France afterwards. In 1910, he began teaching at Charterhouse, another of England's great public schools, where he met the poet Robert Graves, then a pupil. 195 In his autobiography, Goodbye to All That, Graves remembered Mallory fondly, both for his encouragement of his interest in literature and poetry, and his instruction in climbing. Graves recalled, Mallory, was wasted, as a teacher, at Charterhouse. He tried to treat his class in a friendly way, which puzzled and offended them. While at Charterhouse, Mallory met his wife, Ruth Turner, 1892–1942, who lived in Godalming, and they were married in 1914, 6 days before Britain and Germany went to war. George and Ruth had 2 daughters and a son, Francis Clare, 1915–2001, Burge Ruth, known as Barry, 1917–1953, and John, born 1920. In December 1915, Mallory was commissioned in the Royal Garrison Artillery as a second lieutenant and was promoted to lieutenant on July 1, 1917. He served in France during the First World War and fought at the Battle of the Somme. He relinquished his commission on February 21, 1920, retaining the rank of lieutenant. After the war, Mallory returned to Charterhouse, but resigned in 1921 to join the first Everest expedition. Between expeditions, he attempted to make a living from writing and lecturing, with only partial success. In 1923, he took a job as lecturer with the Cambridge University Extramural Studies Department. 467 He was given temporary leave so that he could join the 1924 Everest attempt. Climbing. In Europe. In 1910, in a party led by Irving, Mallory and a friend attempted to climb Mont Velin in the Alps, but turned back shortly before the summit due to Mallory's altitude sickness. In 1911, Mallory climbed Mont Blanc, and made the 3rd ascent of the frontier ridge of Mont Medi in a party again led by Irving. According to Helmut Dummler, Mallory was apparently prompted by a friend on the Western Front in 1916 a highly emotional article of his ascent of this great climb. This article was published as Mont Blanc from the Col du Géant by the eastern buttress of Mont Medi in the Alpine Journal and contained his question, "Have we vanquished an enemy?" To which he responded, "None but ourselves." By 1913, he had ascended Pillar Rock in the English Lake District, with no assistance, by what is now known as Mallory's rat, currently graded hard very severe 5A, American grading 5.9. It is likely to have been the hardest rat in Britain for many years. One of Mallory's closest friends and climbing companions was a young woman named Cotty Sanders, who became a novelist with the pseudonym of Anne Bridge. The nature of their relationship is elusive. She was a climbing friend or a casual sweetheart. After Mallory died, Cotty wrote a memoir of him, which was never published, but provided much of the material used by later biographers such as David Pye and David Robertson in a novel Everest Dream. In Asia, Mallory participated in the initial 1921 British reconnaissance expedition, organized and financed by the Mount Everest Committee, that explored routes up to the North Col of Mount Everest. The expedition produced the first accurate maps of the region around the mountain, as Mallory, his climbing partner Guy Bullock, and E.O. Wheeler of the Survey of India explored in depth several approaches to its peak. Under Mallory's leadership, and with the assistance of around a dozen Sherpas, the group climbed several lower peaks near Everest. His party were almost certainly the first Westerners to view the western comb at the foot of the Lhotse face, as well as charting the course of the Rongbuk Glacier up to the base of the north face. After circling the mountain from the south side, his party finally discovered the East Rongbuk Glacier, the highway to the summit now used by nearly all climbers on the Tibetan side of the mountain. By climbing up to the saddle of the North Ridge, the 23,030 feet, 7,020 meters, North Col, they spied a route to the summit via the Northeast Ridge over the obstacle of the second step. In 1922, Mallory returned to the Himalayas as part of the party led by Brigadier General Charles Bruce and climbing leader Edward Strutt, with a view to making a serious attempt on the summit. Eschewing their bottled oxygen, which was at the time seen as going against the spirit of mountaineering, Mallory, along with Howard Somervell and Edward Norton, almost reached the crest of the Northeast Ridge. Despite being hampered and slowed by the thin air, they achieved a record altitude of 26,980 feet, 8,225 meters, before weather conditions and the late hour forced them to retreat. 427 to 428. A second party led by George Finch reached an elevation around 27,300 feet, 8,321 meters, using bottled oxygen both for climbing and, a first, for sleeping. 431 to 34. The party climbed at record speeds, a fact that Mallory seized upon during the next expedition. Mallory organized a third unsuccessful attempt on the summit, departing as the monsoon season arrived. While Mallory was leading a group of porters down the lower slopes of the North Col of Everest in fresh, waist-deep snow, an avalanche swept over the group, killing 7 Sherpas. The attempt was immediately abandoned, and Mallory was subsequently accused of poor judgment, including by expedition participants such as Dr. Longstaff. 452. Mallory is famously quoted as having replied to the question, "Why did you want to climb Mount Everest?" with the retort, "Because it's there," which has been called the most famous 3 words in mountaineering. Questions have arisen over the authenticity of the quote, and whether Mallory actually said it. Some have suggested that it was a paraphrase by a newspaper reporter, but scrutiny of the original report in the New York Times leaves this unresolved. The phrase was certainly consistent with the direct quotes cited in the New York Times report, so it appears not to misrepresent Mallory's attitude. Mallory's last climb. June 1924 expedition to Everest. Mallory joined the 1924 Everest expedition, led, as in 1922, by General Charles Bruce. Mallory, who was 37 at the time of the ascent, believed his age would make this his last opportunity to climb the mountain, and when touring the U.S., he proclaimed that the expedition would successfully reach the summit. Mallory and Bruce had made the first attempt, which was inexplicably aborted by Mallory at Camp 5. Norton and Somervell set off from Camp 6, and in perfect weather, Norton managed, without oxygen, to reach 28,120 feet, 8,570 meters, a new record height. On June 4, 1924, Mallory and Andrew Irvine set off from Advanced Base Camp, ABC, at 21,330 feet, 6,500 meters, and already began using oxygen from the base of the North Col, which they climbed in 2.5 hours. Mallory had been converted from his original skepticism about oxygen usage by his failure on his initial assault and recalling the very rapid ascent of Finch in 1922. At 8:40 on 6 June, they set off, climbing to Camp 5. On 7 June, they reached Camp 6. Mallory wrote he had used only 3/4 of one bottle of oxygen for the 2 days, which suggests a climb rate of some 856 vertical feet per hour. On 8 June, expedition member Noel Odell was moving up behind the pair in a support role. Around 26,000 feet, 7,925 meters, he spotted the two climbing a prominent rock step, either the first or second step, about 1300 hours, although Odell might, conceivably, have been viewing the higher, then unknown, third step. Odell later reported. At the time, Odell observed that one of the men surmounted the second step of the northeast ridge. Apart from his testimony, though, no evidence has been found that Mallory and Irvine climbed higher than the first step. One of their spent oxygen cylinders was found shortly below the first step, and Irvine's ice axe was found nearby in 1933. They never returned to their camp. Presumably, Mallory and Irvine died either late the same evening or on 9 June. The news of Mallory and Irvine's disappearance was widely mourned in Britain, and the two were hailed as national heroes. A memorial service was held in London at St. Paul's Cathedral on 17 October and was attended by a great assembly of family, friends, and dignitaries including King George V and members of the royal family, Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald, and his entire cabinet. Mallory's will was proven in London on 17 December. He bequeathed his estate of £1,706 17s, roughly equivalent to £95,575 in 2018, to his wife. Lost on Everest for 75 years. After their disappearance, several expeditions tried to find their remains, and perhaps, determine if they had reached the summit. Frank Smythe, when on the 1936 expedition, believed he spotted a body below the place where Irvine's ice axe was found 3 years earlier. "I was scanning the face from base camp through a high-powered telescope, when I saw something queer in a gully below the scree shelf. Of course, it was a long way away and very small, but I've a 6/6 eyesight and do not believe it was a rock. This object was at precisely the point where Mallory and Irvine would have fallen had they rolled on over the scree slopes," Smythe wrote in a letter to Edward Felix Norton. He kept the discovery quiet as he feared press sensationalism, and it was not revealed until 2013, after the letter was found by his son when preparing his biography. In late 1986, Tom Holtsville launched a search expedition based on reports from Chinese climber Zhang Junyan that his tent mate, Wang Hongbao, had stumbled across an English dead at 26,570 feet, 8,100 meters, in 1975. On the last day of the expedition, Holtsville met with Zhang Junyan, who reiterated that, despite official denials from the Chinese Mountaineering Association, Wang had come back from a short excursion and described finding a foreign mountaineer at 8,100 meters. Wang was killed in an avalanche the day after delivering his verbal report, so the location was never more precisely fixed. In 1999, the Mallory and Irvine Research Expedition, sponsored in part by the TV show Nova and the BBC, and organized and led by Eric Simonson, arrived at Everest to search for the lost pair. Guided by the research of Johan Hemlib, within hours of beginning the search on 1 May, Conrad Anker found a frozen body at 26,760 feet, 8,157 meters, on the north face of the mountain. As the body was found below where Irvine's axe had been found in 1933 at 27,760 feet, 8,461.25 meters, the team expected it to be Irvine's, and were hoping to recover the camera that he had reportedly carried with him. They were surprised to find that name tags on the body's clothing bore the name of G. Leigh Mallory. The body was well preserved, due to the freezing conditions. A brass altimeter, a stag-handled lambsfoot pocket knife with leather slipcase, and an unbroken pair of snow goggles were recovered from the pockets of the clothing. Also personal effects, including a letter and a bill from a London supplier of climbing equipment, confirmed the identity of the body. The team could not, however, locate the camera that the two climbers took to document their final summit attempt. Experts from Kodak have said that if a camera is ever found, some chance exists that its film could be developed to produce printable images, if extraordinary measures are taken, and have provided guidance as to handling of such a camera and the film inside, in the event that such were found in the investigation. Before leaving the site of Mallory's death, the expedition conducted an Anglican service for the climber and covered his remains with a cairn on the mountain. Sir Edmund Hillary, who with Tenzing Norgay is credited with reaching the Everest summit first, welcomed news of the discovery of Mallory's body and described as very appropriate the possibility that Mallory might turn out to have summited decades earlier. He was really the initial pioneer of the whole idea of climbing Mount Everest, Hillary said. The 1999 research team returned to the mountain in 2001 to conduct further research. They discovered Mallory and Irvine's last camp, but failed to find either Irvine or a camera. Another initiative in 2004 also proved fruitless. In 2007, the Altitude Everest expedition, led by Conrad Anker, who had found Mallory's body, tried to retrace Mallory's last steps. Reaching the summit. Whether Mallory and Irvine reached Everest's summit is unknown. The question remains open to speculation and is the topic of much debate and research. Mallory's body. From the discovery of a serious rope jerk injury around Mallory's waist, which was encircled by the remnants of a climbing rope, Irvine and he apparently were roped together when one of them slipped. Mallory's body lay 300 meters below and about 100 meters horizontal to the location of an ice axe found in 1933, which is generally accepted from three characteristic marks on the shaft as belonging to Irvine. The fact that the body was relatively unbroken, apart from fractures to the right leg, the tibia and fibula were broken just above the boot, in comparison to other bodies found in the same location that were known to have fallen from the northeast ridge, strongly suggests that Mallory could not have fallen from the ice axe site, but must have fallen from much lower down. Wang reportedly found Mallory's ice axe near his body, and took it with him. If this is true, then Mallory not only survived the initial fall with Irvine, but was in possession of his axe until the last seconds before striking a rock that stopped his final fall. When found, his body was sun-bleached, frozen, and mummified. The other significant find made on Mallory's body was a severe, golf ball-sized puncture wound in his forehead, which was the likely cause of his death. The unusual puncture wound is consistent with one that might be inflicted by an ice axe, leading some to conclude that, while Mallory was descending in a self-arrest glissade, sliding down a slope while dragging his ice axe in the snow to control the speed of his descent, his ice axe may have struck a rock and bounced off, striking him fatally. 2 items of circumstantial evidence from the body suggest that he may have attempted, or reached, the summit. Oxygen supply from the location of their final camp, discovered in 2001, a summit climb may be estimated to have taken them around 11 hours. Assuming they took 2 cylinders each, they had only about 8 hours of oxygen available, although this depends on the flow rate, which could be controlled and was not necessarily full flow. The oxygen would almost certainly have run out before they reached the summit. The 2 flow rates available on those oxygen sets were 1.5 and 2.2 liters per minute. Both are low rates for active climbing, and the 2 are unlikely to have used the lower flow rate. One of their oxygen bottles was found some 200 yards, 180 meters, short of the first step, which enables their speed of climbing to be calculated, about 275 vertical foot per hour. Hillary and Norgay climbed at 350 vertical foot per hour at this altitude. At best, they might have reached the base of the second step with 1.5 hours of oxygen remaining each. Given the vertical distance remaining, about 800 vertical foot, the climb to the summit after the second step at the same climbing rate would be 3 hours, but climbing speed drops quickly with altitude. Hillary and Norgay managed only 150 vertical foot per hour above 28,000 feet. Thus, even if Mallory had taken Irvine's oxygen, he would not have had enough oxygen to reach the summit. Another possibility, prompted by Mallory's remark in his last note to John Knoll that they would probably go on 2 cylinders, is that the pair carried 3, and not 2 cylinders each. Mallory's probably implying that the choice was between 2 or 3, as a single cylinder would clearly be inadequate. Mallory's oxygen rig was not found with his body, and neither climber's backpack-style oxygen rig has ever been found. Some believe George Mallory chose his climbing partner, Andrew Sandy Irvine, because he was excellent at repairing the oxygen tanks that had been controversial during that time. The difficult second step. Experienced modern climbers have mixed views on whether Mallory was capable of climbing the second step on the North Ridge, now surmounted by a 15 feet, 4.6 meters, aluminium ladder first permanently fixed in place by Chinese climbers in 1975 to bridge this very difficult pitch. Austrian Theo Fritzsche repeated the free climb solo in 2001 under conditions that resembled those encountered during the 1924 Everest expedition, and assessed the climb as having a grade of 5.6 to 5.7. Fritzsche completed the climb without supplementary oxygen and believes that Mallory could, weather permitting, have reached the summit. In June 2007, As part of the 2007 Altitude Everest expedition, Conrad Anker and Leo Holding Free climbed the second step, having first removed the Chinese ladder, which was later replaced. Holding rated the climb at 5.9, just within Mallory's estimated capabilities. The climb was part of an expedition which tried to recreate the 1924 climb. 8 years earlier, Anker had climbed the second step as part of the Mallory and Irvine research expedition, but had used one point of aid by stepping on a rung of the ladder, which blocked the only available foothold. At that time, he had rated the climb at 5.10, which he considered to be beyond Mallory's capabilities, but after the June 2007 climb, he changed his view and said that he could have climbed it. Noel Odell believed that he had seen Mallory and Irvine ascend the second step, but eventually changed his story to say it was the first step. Towards the end of his life, however, he reaffirmed his original view. Recent observations taken from Odell's vantage point by other climbers suggest that Odell would have probably seen the men at the second step as he had initially reported. Possible sightings of Irvine. In 1979, a Chinese climber named Wang Hongbao reported to Japanese expedition leader Ryuden Hasegawa that, in 1975, he had discovered the body of an English dead at 26,600 feet, 8,100 meters. Wang was killed in an avalanche the day after this verbal report, so the location was never more precisely fixed. The Chinese Mountaineering Association officially denied the sighting claim. In 1986, Chinese climber Zhang Junyan, who had been sharing the tent with Wang in 1975, confirmed, to Tom Holtzville, Wang's report of finding a foreign climber's body. Zhang stated that Wang had been out for only 20 minutes. If this report was accurate, at that altitude and date, the body must have been that of Irvine. Wang's sighting was the key to the discovery of Mallory's body 24 years later in the same general area, though Wang's reported description of the body he found, face up, with a hole in cheek, is not consistent with the condition and posture of Mallory's body, which was face down, its head almost completely buried in scree, and with a golf ball-sized puncture wound on his forehead. The 2001 research expedition discovered Wang's campsite location and made an extensive search of its surroundings. Mallory's remained the only ancient body in the vicinity. Some argue it must have been Mallory, not Irvine, that Wang had found in 1975, despite the variations in body posture. Zhang said that Wang had only been found about 20 minutes, but he had waited while dozing in his sleeping bag, so Wang's stroll could have been of longer duration. Conrad Anker now believes Wang did indeed find Irvine and not Mallory. In 2001, another Chinese climber, Xu Jing, claimed to have seen the body of Andrew Irvine in 1960, reported in Hemleb and Simonson's Detectives on Everest, although testimony is uncertain with regard to the location of his find. On 2 occasions, Xu placed it between Camps 6 and 7, the Yellow Band, around 8,300 meters, though later changed it to the knee ridge between the first and second steps, near 28,050 feet, 8,550 meters, and directly on the knee ridge. In spite of several such rumored and reported sightings, subsequent searches of these locations on the north face have failed to find any trace of Irvine. Some climbers speculate that Xu spotted Mallory. American researcher Tom Holtzville reported that Xu had spotted the body as he descended by a more direct route due to exhaustion, while his teammates had continued their ascent. The body was lying on its back in a narrow slot, its feet pointing towards the summit, and its face blackened from frostbite. Holtzville has claimed that a location in the Yellow Band, matching this description exactly, has been identified at 27,641 feet, 8,425 meters, by his analysis of high-resolution aerial photography. In July 2005, the Alpine Club of St. Petersburg, Russia, published an article to commemorate the 45th anniversary of the North Face climb by the Chinese expedition in 1960. The article referred to the presentation by Wang Fuzhou, a member of the group which reached the summit of Everest on May 25, 1960, given by him in Leningrad before the USSR Geographical Society in 1965. It claims that Xu Jing had seen the body of a European climber at an altitude of some 28,200 feet, 8,600 meters, just below the notorious second step. That Russian article could be a first non-mainstream and non-English language source of evidence in the Mallory-Irvine story. In particular, it mentions that Xu laconically reported that he had identified the body to be European by the braces, suspenders, that it wore. Theories. A range of different outcomes has been proposed, and new theories continue to be put forward. Most views have the two carrying 2 cylinders of oxygen each, reaching and climbing either the first or second step, where they are seen by Odell. At this point, 2 main alternatives remain: either Mallory takes Irvine's oxygen and goes on alone, and may or may not reach the summit, or both go on together until they turn back, having used up their oxygen, or realizing that they will do so before the summit. In either case, Mallory slips and falls to his death while descending, perhaps caught in the fierce snow squall that sent Odell to take shelter in their tent. Irvine either falls with him, or in the first scenario, dies alone of exhaustion and hypothermia high up on the ridge. The hypothesis advanced by Tom Holtsville in February 2008 is that Odell sighted Mallory and Irvine climbing the first step for a final look around while they were descending from a failed summit bid. Assessments by other climbers. Angsering's assessment. Angsering, a Sherpa member of the 1924 British Everest expedition, was interviewed in 2000 by Jonathan Neal, who recounted. Climbing partners. Harry Tyndale, one of Mallory's climbing partners, said of Mallory. Geoffrey Winthrop Young, an accomplished mountain climber, held Mallory's ability in awe. First real ascent, or just to the summit? If evidence were to be uncovered that showed that George Mallory or Andrew Irvine had reached the summit of Everest in 1924, advocates of Hillary and Norgay's first ascent maintain that the historical record should not be changed to state that Mallory and Irvine made the first ascent, displacing Hillary and Norgay. Mount Everest summiteer in 1965, Major HPS Ahluwalia, claims that without photographic proof, no evidence shows that Mallory reached the summit, and it would be unfair to say that the first man to scale Mount Everest was George Mallory. George Mallory's own son, John Mallory, who was only 3 years old when his father died, said, "To me, the only way you achieve a summit is to come back alive. The job is only half done if you don't get down again." Sir Edmund Hillary's daughter, Sarah, when questioned regarding her father's take on the debate, said, his view was that he had got 50 good years out of being conqueror of Everest, and, whatever happened, he wasn't particularly worried. That's my feeling as well. Edmund Hillary's assessment. Edmund Hillary echoed John Mallory's opinion, asking. Chris Bonington's assessment. Chris Bonington, the British mountaineer, argued that. Conrad Anker's assessment. Conrad Anker, who found Mallory's body in 1999, free-climbed the second step in 2007 and has worn replica 1924 climbing gear on Everest, said he believes it's possible, but highly improbable, that they made it to the top, citing the difficulty of the second step and the position of Mallory's body. He stated that, in his opinion. Robert Graves' tale of Mallory's pipe. Robert Graves, who climbed with Mallory, in his autobiography recounts this story, at the time famous in climbing circles, about an ascent that Mallory made as a young man in 1908. The route is now called Mallory's Slab, a Hartwig and Wiley Wed. Legacy. Mallory was honored by having a court named after him at his alma mater, Magdalen College, Cambridge, with an inscribed stone commemorating his death set above the doorway to one of the buildings. The Friends of Magdalen Boat Club was renamed the Mallory Club in recognition of his achievements in exploration and rowing at the college. 2 high peaks in California's Sierra Nevada, Mount Mallory, and Mount Irvine, located a few miles southeast of Mount Whitney, were named after them. The Times obituary of George Finch said that Mallory and Finch were the 2 best alpinists of their time. Mallory was captured on film by expedition cameraman John Knoll, who released his film of the 1924 expedition The Epic of Everest. Some of his footage was also used in George Lowe's 1953 documentary The Conquest of Everest. A documentary on the 2001 Mallory and Irvine research expedition, Found on Everest, was produced by Riley Morton. Mallory was played by Brian Blessed in the 1991 recreation of his last climb, Galahad of Everest in October 2013. Benedict Cumberbatch was tipped as the front-runner to play the role of Mallory in a new Hollywood version of The Attempt on Everest in 1924, to be directed by Doug Liman and adapted from Jeffrey Archer's 2009 novel Paths of Glory. Tragedy in the mountains has proved a recurring theme in the Mallory line. Mallory's younger brother, Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh Mallory, met his death on a mountain range when the Avro York carrying him to his new appointment as Air Commander-in-Chief of Southeast Asia Command crashed in the French Alps in 1944, killing all on board. A memorial window to George Mallory along with a memorial plaque to Trafford can be found at St. Wilfrid's Church, Mobberley, where their father, Herbert grandfather, also called George, and other family members had served as rector. Mallory's daughter, Frances Clare, married physiologist Glenn Allen Milliken, who was killed in a climbing accident in Fall Creek Falls State Park, Tennessee. Francis Mallory's son, Richard Milliken, became a respected climber in his own right during the 1960s and 70s. Mallory's grandson, also named George Mallory, reached the summit of Everest in 1995 via the North Ridge with 6 other climbers as part of the American Everest expedition of 1995. He left a picture of his grandparents at the summit citing unfinished business. In Anthony Geffen's 2010 biographical documentary film about Mallory's life and final expedition, The Wildest Dream, Conrad Anker and Leo Holding attempt to reconstruct the climb, dressed and equipped similarly to Mallory and Irvine. Keith Thomas and Glyn Bailey are creating a musical about Mallory's life called Mountain of Dreams. Belgian rock band Girls in Hawaii's song Mallory's Height on their 2013 album Everest is a homage to Mallory. Extracts of the Nova, BBC broadcast can be heard, around 3:35. Bibliography, around 3:35. Bibliography, around 3:35. Bibliography, around 3:35. Bibliography,